Good morning, and thank you for joining this webinar. Today, as Francesca was indicating before, we are going to go through some ideas and considerations towards prioritizing activities under the national implementation plans of the Stockholm Convention. First, the important thing to mention is that when you arrive at this stage, phase 3, it means that information from inventories is already available. And this includes not only information that you have, but also data gaps that you might have identified. And those data gaps can also be a very useful source for making priorities and for making the assessment, to really see if you need to go further and try to find and solve those gaps issues, or if those and that information can be skipped and continue moving forward. When you are undertaking your NIPs for the first time, you'll be doing priorities for the first time. But most countries at this stage are in the process of reviewing or updating or have already done that. Therefore, it's a reassessment of national priorities and inclusion of new things if that's really necessary. This phase is not to be done separately from the other ones, but it needs to be seen as an integral part of all the process. When you're doing an inventory, you would be realizing which things could be priorities, and also it would bring and provide all the elements or the elements you need to consider for an action plan. As you know, this implementation plan is the general plan under Stockholm, but then each of the chemicals might have specific action plans, for example, for the fluorinated compounds. What will you have afterwards? You'll have a number of criteria that will help you prioritizing for considering health and environmental impacts of POPs, for example, or you might have also some other inclusions like socioeconomic impacts of doing something or not doing anything to take care of these chemicals. So to start, it is very important to consider the life cycle in general of these chemicals, and in particular if there is legislation available, not only in the international context, but mainly in the national framework. Do you have ban or restriction for production or use of these chemicals? Do you have stockpiles? Do you have a plan to manage stockpiles in general? What is the situation with wastes and contaminated sites? At the end, most of the POPs in Annex A and Annex B might be considered dead chemicals. That's the case, for example, of the brominated flame retardants, which are no longer being produced as far as we have the information we have. Therefore, the main issue there is those articles that are still in use, or the wastes or the contaminated sites that they might have produced. So having an overview of what is the status of the legislation can also provide elements towards a good priority setting. Maybe that's the first thing to do. Maybe you are at the stage of implementing. It depends a lot on the national situation. You have guidance documents for assessment of pesticides, for undertaking inventories of both PFOS and brominated flame retardants, but also a BAT and BEP guidance. Those documents are can provide a general overview for you to do. At this stage, when you are in phase 3, you have already used them, but if in particular BAT and BEP guidance are indicating or highlighting some techniques or technologies that might be used for all countries parties to the convention, those that are really developing and those that have a different status. The other interesting thing that you need to put into this priority setting scheme is what happens with your customs. Are they efficient in their work? Do they need support? Do they need legislation? Do they need training? Is analytical facilities or are analytical facilities available for these purposes? Do you have any labeling scheme that can help you identify things? If the answer is yes, you might have some priorities. If the answer to all these questions is a no, then you might need to start doing other things. So first, this presentation will go and try to cover key problems for the new POPs, those that have been listed in Annex A or B in 2009 in particular, and also endosulfan that was listed in 2011. The idea with this is not to highlight all problems, but some of them that have been identified for many countries. So starting with alpha and beta HCH, the main issue is stockpiles and contaminated sites. As you know, these two chemicals are not produced with a commercial purpose. They were produced as they have co-production with lindane. Therefore, any ban for lindane can or will introduce an immediate ban for alpha and beta, except if you have stockpiles or contaminated sites. In that case, you need to have that and highlight that as something to take care of within your national plans. For pesticides, just as chlordecone, pentachlorobenzene, those are, as far as we know, also dead chemicals from the pesticides perspective, not the case for lindane and endosulfan for many parties. Endosulfan was listed with crop and pest exemptions. The exemption is still available, will be available for some time. With lindane, as you know, as it was listed in 2009, the exception might expire next August, depending on how the COPS decides to move forward. In any case, for pesticides in general, if you have any restrictions or banning or enforcement that could help to make priorities, you don't need to do anything regarding legislation, or you might need to be doing something to enforce what you have. Again, the issue of stockpiles and contaminated sites is a main problem for many countries, in particular for those that were producing lindane before and they have the alpha and beta HCH related to it. In the case of endosulfan, as I was mentioning before, these have an added level of complexity because of the different exemptions and that are available for parties to use. In any case, all of these chemicals are to be phased out very soon. In some years, for endosulfan, lindane maybe the use of lindane can no longer be available after August. Therefore, what it is important here to really consider is the party ready to do that? And that should be a priority in the case of lindane and in the case of chlordecone and pentachlorobenzene. Maybe you have to do nothing, therefore your priority might not be high, but in a way you have to do it to be in the safe side. What happens with PFOS, with the BDEs, hexabromodiphenyl and HBCD? In the case, I will start with the easiest one, which is hexabromodiphenyl, which seems no longer to be used worldwide since many years. And in those of you that have gone through the guidance, you might realize that if hexabromodiphenyl is decreasing in the environment. Therefore, it's also showing that the use has stopped, and there is no register, as far as we know, that it is still being produced. Therefore, hexabromodiphenyl, what it's needed is what we call the first line of defense, which can go into border control or legislation. Those are the main issues with it. Of course, again, for all these chemicals, the issue of stockpiles, contaminated sites, articles in use becoming waste, and waste from articles is a main issue to consider. BDEs, brominated flame retardants, have been used in two main sectors, which is the transport sector and the plastic or the e-waste, the electronic and electrical sector. Therefore, if you are still using computers which are relatively old, this might be something to consider when becoming a waste. As you know, the convention allows that those articles that are in use in the entry into force can still be in use, but the main issue with them is after use, is when becoming waste. For the brominated flame retardants listed in the Stockholm Convention, an exemption was included when it was listed, and it is the possibility for recycling articles that might contain these chemicals. This exemption is available until 2030. Therefore, if you are doing analysis, for example, you might be finding them in some articles that were not put on purpose, but they are coming those articles were produced using recycling materials. And that's there are some interesting papers indicating how they can be found, but in very low levels. Therefore, by 2030, probably that will not be an issue. In the case of PFOS and all the related chemicals, as it was listed in 2009, it has many exemptions and acceptable purposes. In here, the additional complexity relates in that the acceptable purposes are of with no deadline. They don't have a specific deadline. So those things listed in the convention as acceptable purposes, PFOS can still be used and produced for them. Therefore, it is still available. It's still entering the system. It can still be happening that with PFOS. For most countries, that's an issue that is very easily solved because they are not producing PFOS, but it can come with some articles. So it's something to have a look at, but maybe priorities for PFOS might be completely different depending on the part of the world you have to develop your national implementation plan. So for regarding the process, for making inventories, the idea is to start with qualitative assessments. As you know, at this stage, you already have data, but the guidance have this tiered approach. That means that maybe you don't have numbers, but you have indications of where to look or how to look at it. In this qualitative assessment, general information sources can be used, and you can go from the risk management evaluation that the POPs Review Committee undertook some years ago. You can go through the inventory guidance, but what it is very important at this stage is if you can register or if you cannot register, because it will make a whole difference in your approach and in your priorities. If you are a country that is producing and exporting or exporting these chemicals, for example, in the case of endosulfan can still be produced and used for the specific exemptions in the crop pest complexes. Therefore, you have to check the production authorizations that you have. Are there relevant industries and associations? Do you have the possibility of having alternatives to it? Are you exporting? How much? Is this only for internal use? In the case of those countries which are importing countries or users, the important information is the customs regarding the import of these chemicals, if available. Also, to secure the trade is being done in a legal way, and the communication with those using and importing these chemicals. It can be associations, it can be industries that are formulating, it depends on very different things. So what is the possible sequence for risk management measures? You always need to find or to work on your first line of defense so that you avoid new POPs in the future. And that is very important. It doesn't only mean import, it also means production in certain cases. And if you stop these chemicals entering into the system, then it will be easier. You will need to work with those environmental liabilities that you have, maybe stockpiles or products or articles in use, but not really to keep on thinking that you will have more and more each time. You can in a way, restrict or put a number, a total number of those chemicals available in your country. In the case of the brominated flame retardants and the use, for example, of used cars, is an issue to consider. The guidance established a deadline of 2000 time frame of 2004. So those cars that are in use or are being imported that were produced before 2004 might be of a problem for countries, but those after that date, if they contain brominated flame retardants, they might be coming from recycling, but not really for production. So that's something important to consider. Do you have alternatives for when you take any measure? If you don't have alternatives, maybe a priority is to work on alternatives. Do you have specific people working on recycling? Is it a very important economic part of your development? What is the social impact of them? Those are elements for you to put in maybe a table, a matrix, to understand or to quantify afterwards those things that might be priorities. The convention, as you know, established specific exemptions and acceptable purposes as a way of limiting the future. There is only, for specific exemptions, a period of 5 years that can be extended for 5 years more. So these priorities can also be related to short, medium, or long-term strategies in your country. So maybe priority number 1 should be or could be something that needs to be done right now, but priority number 2 might be something that you need to do, but you have a little more flexibility time-wise. Another important thing to do here is to notify and to register for specific exemptions and acceptable purposes. Those things are and appear in the websites. So if somebody is willing to make an export, for example, they will know if you have registered for a specific exemption that you are still allowing that chemical to get or pass through your borders, or an article containing those chemicals to pass through your borders. If you have not, it means that you are establishing or putting measures in place. Therefore, it's an indirect way of protecting yourself as well. But it is useful. If you are also party to Rotterdam Convention, you know, the exchange of information is essential for preventing future problems. If you are also having production or uses, you can apply bottom BEP. That could also be part of your planning afterwards. It might not be a priority at this stage, but maybe you can consider inserting in legislation some issues that indicate that new sources or new industrial facilities that want to establish or set up in your country need to apply that. For those of you that belong to the EU, this might be obsolete at this stage because your legislation is very strong in this regard. For some other countries, this might be an option for them to move forward. Second line of defense. In this one, the main idea is not only the identification, but the managing of the existing new POPs. And the keywords here are existing, those that are already inside your country. For that, it is very essential, or the key is to identify if you have production, but also if you have articles in your country. And that's done through an inventory, which at this stage you have already finished, or you are practically finishing. Then if you have those articles, it is you need to have an idea when is their end of life, when they are finishing, when you have to stop using or finishing using them. That might also bring some ideas of waste disposal needs, of any technology to destroy those chemicals. These are sometimes very costly things, so maybe one of the issues you might be writing either as a priority or in your action plan is a project to follow up with these things. If you have many articles that are becoming e-wastes very soon, what are you going to do with them? Are you going to keep on allowing the recycling? Are you going to address any particular consideration for exporting these? In what conditions? To which countries? In which context? Following which rules? Those are minimum things, but that might make complete difference when writing or developing or designing your future plans. So the managing of those existing POPs in your country is something you need to consider, in particular for stockpiles, wastes, and contaminated sites. What are some of the elements that have been identified to be most efficient? One is, for example, do you have any estimates of the releases of the different chemicals in the life cycle? If you are using a computer, is it that contains brominated flame retardants, for example, the releases, is that very high? Is it medium? Is it low? What are the impacts of keep on using it? What is the impact of taking it from use right now and sending it into e-wastes? What other measures can you establish? You can establish some risk reduction potential measures, and are they available already? Do you have any other development plans that you can go into it? I will go again into the recycling scheme. Most countries that have recycling, it's really very well legislated, and people are protected. So in some other countries, that's not the case. So maybe the priority for some countries might be to start protecting people working there. Therefore, for them, releases of the reduction of reduction of the releases of these chemicals might be category, the top category high. Identify other sources and the size of the releases that might also be another way. Therefore, if you use these three main ways or rationales, you'll have different categories that might help you not only to identify which is the main issue to address for you, but also what are the planning stages afterwards. Resources. You need to quantify the resources, and that's not only related to money and funding, but also to people enforcing it, to people doing it, to industries that might be needing to change, or that might give some funds to help and support. Also, implementation or production or development of certain legislations and laws might also be a question here. So if the resources that you need are really, really high and the impact related to it is very, very low, you might think that it's not priority number one. Though if the risks towards your population is really very high, then resources, you have to find a way towards finding them through projects, through grants, through your national budget, through mainstreaming. And that brings me to the feasibility of undertaking any measure that you might be writing in your national implementation plans. National implementation plans need to be implemented. Therefore, anything that's written there should have been assessed in a way that you include there human resources that you might be needed. Do you have the capacity or the capability or the infrastructure that it is needed? If you are thinking of having control in the customs, do you need to have laboratories in the customs? Is that a feasible approach, or how are other measures or ways to do it? Can you detect brominated compounds in plastics very easily? Is that implementable for customs, for example? Do you have or do you want to have legislation there? Do you want to separate your waste streams? How do you want to do it? But any decisions you make on the measures, each measure should be assessed with the implementation concept. Of course, also, another question is it practical or enforceable for the party in the short, medium, or long term? How are you going to work and prepare yourself to have something that might be very difficult to implement now, but in the near future, how do you want to change the paradigm for that? So what is this general scheme for this? As we were saying before, start with something qualitative, then maybe improve that or make an advanced, use inventory techniques, those in the guidance or those that you already have in place within your countries, and try to see the shape of the elephant. Maybe not the size. It might be a very, very little elephant, but if you have the right head, the right feet, the right nose, then you will know where the big problems are. That's why the qualitative assessment is very good. What is the shape of the problem you have? Once you have that, you can go into other tiers where you need results or where you need measurements or where you need some ranking strategies to move forward. If that's something that you can do very easily because you don't have old used cars that are from before 2004, then you might go and move towards more advanced ways of making inventories. But remember, when you are going in depth, sometimes the information that you will be finding might not be really something to change any measure that you will be willing to undertake. So the impact of the measure might not change because you have a better inventory. So you also need to be very careful up to where you want to have a number. Is it going to make a difference to know that you have 1,000 or to know that you have 1,100? Maybe yes, maybe not. But if any of those answers might make you planning different, might make you the priorities setting very different. So the idea with this is that for each measure, rank it. Is it priority? Is it a relevant measure to implement? Is the risk that reduction of that potential measure going to really be relevant for this? Which type of resources do you need to identify the sources and the size of the releases? Is it worth it to put more money there, or is it worth it to go and start doing implementation in a step-by-step approach? What are the capacities and capabilities? Is it practical and enforceable, the measure that you are doing? So these are all elements to consider when you are establishing a measure within your action plan. For example, there were some countries that when Stockholm Convention entered into force, they didn't know the shape of their problem, far from knowing the size of the problem. So they decided to put forward legislation to phase out, for example, PCBs 10 years after entry into force of the convention. And they realized soon after that that was not really an enforceable measure because of the quantities they have. Each of the measures should be put in context and evaluated in a way that you can really see that they are making an impact without putting your hands on hold. Usually uncertainties will be there. It is very improbable that any inventory you do for the first time will have the final numbers, so you have to consider that as well. The other part of this process is that any measure should be something endorsed by all those that need to implement it, and this goes from the government until those that are part of the chain, those that are part of the life cycle, for example, the industry. The next step is, once you have your identification of the priority measures, is to see how you can put it from the theory into the implementation part. So, for example, if the measures are to implement, they could be a high priority because it's easy to solve and you will be dealing with a problem in a very efficient way. If they are enforceable, that's the same rationale. If they have a very good risk reduction potential over their life cycle, that's also something that you can do maybe very easily with not a lot of resources and then implement very, very quickly. Other measures might also be identified and written down, but maybe they are not ranked as priorities, but sometimes it's very useful not to forget those ideas and have them as placeholders for those that will be coming after, that will see why you took them out from your initial planning and your initial ways of doing your implementation plans. So what it is really important is that the measures need to be implemented. So getting agreements and resources from decision makers, it's very important, and that should be identified also as a priority. That's still not in the implementation of the NIP. It's in the previous phases, but that should be part of the planning for the national coordinator or for the team that's working on this, is to get the real agreements. The last bullet point here talks to document your experience. What had happened a lot is that those that did the implementation plans before did not write some things. So when people went and revised again inventories and numbers and why certain actions were taken instead of others, they didn't know exactly what happened and what put the balance into some things and not into the others. So one very important recommendation is to document the experience as much as possible. So those that follow can really understand the rationale, but also for you, even if you did that, sometimes if you don't write some things, you will not remember exactly why one decision was taken and not another one that practically seemed of the same weight. So that's something to really consider in doing this. So as a summary, identification of script problems that will go into the phase 2 inventories, so that they need to serve for this purpose. If not, you are not undertaking a very good inventory technique. Qualitative assessment to start thinking of what are the relevance of certain things in front of others. What type of measures as first line of defense applies these criteria, asking certain questions regarding feasibility of doing it, resources available, and then the second line of defense, which really needs to go and identify the priority measures. It's no longer decision on the measures, but identifying those that can really be enforceable. So this brings us to an end of this presentation. As you might have realized, we are not indicating any specific way of doing it. We are highlighting many questions. Priority setting is a country-driven thing. It's a completely national thing. You need to remember different things. One is, of course, you need to go in the framework of your national activities legislation, but also comply with the Stockholm Convention. Those two things are to put there, and then start to see what are the feasible things to do. As a final remark, long-term planning is very important because you really need to know where you're going and what is your target, but also concentrate in those things that you can do in the short term, so that you move and you can show progress not only to your government, but towards the implementation of the Stockholm Convention. And medium-term strategies might be the best approaches in here, but the short-term are necessary to move forward. Therefore, concentrate efforts in having a vision, a final plan, strategy, where your target is, but try to focus on those activities that you can do immediately after your planning stage finalizes, because you need to start implementing as quick as possible so that the momentum of and the knowledge is not lost. So for the time being, I'd like to thank you at this